Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversations. This is a format that is only possible in partnership between Springer Nature and the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. The idea is that we have a conversation with the speaker, and we're going to talk about their experience, their inspiration, and their opinion in current issues. As an audience online, please feel free to make any questions by raising your hand on the Zoom call. I'll be able to pose the question to the speaker, and if you have any technical issue or any question, please feel free to use the chat option. We have a moderator dedicated for it. So my name is Filipe Almeida. I am an associate editor at Nature Biomedical Engineering. And today, or right now, I have the pleasure of talking to Marcus Moll. Marcus is a professor and chair of the Department of Pediatric Respiratory Medicine, Immunology, and Critical Care Medicine at Charité here in Berlin. And welcome, Marcus, for being here. And you are the speaker at the Falling Walls Breakthrough Day today, but also you won the Breakthrough of the Year in the category of Life Sciences. So congratulations for your achievement.
Thank you.
And so I would like to start by talking about exactly that. What's your breakthrough, and what is all about?
Yeah, thank you, Philippe. So it's a real honor and pleasure to receive this award. And it is about cystic fibrosis and a new therapy for cystic fibrosis that targets the underlying cause or problem of the disease now for the majority of our patients.
Okay, so can you explain very briefly what is this therapy and why is so innovative?
Yeah, so I'm trying to be brief, but so maybe for a brief introduction. So cystic fibrosis is still the most common fatal genetic disease. It mainly affects the lungs, but also many other organs. And a key problem, a key defect, is a mutation in a chloride channel that is normally expressed in the surface of the airways, but also other epithelial organs, where it really plays an important role in salt and water transport that is essential for normal mucus properties. So, and in the lung, in other organs, mucus has a very important protective role. It entraps the bacteria we inhale all the time. So if that does not work, and if it cannot be moved, then the airways clog, they plug with mucus, the patients get chronic infections and inflammation that destroys the lung over time. Now, when the genetic defect was identified, actually only a couple of months before the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, that really raised hope that will one day be possible to treat the underlying cause of disease. And what was also found that there's one, we call it hotspot mutation, that causes a folding defect of the protein so that the channel never gets to the membrane. And what was possible now from a lot of mechanistic work, unraveling the disease mechanisms we were involved in early on, by using high throughput screening of small molecules, to identify a combination of three small molecules that can actually bind to the protein during its biosynthesis and restore the folding defect in a way so that the chloride channel is actually inserted into the membrane to restore its function.
Fantastic. And how did you get to this career path? Can you recall any particular inspiration or moment in life that you're like, oh, okay, I want to be a doctor. I want to go through these clinical studies?
Yeah, so I was thinking for a long time, trying to decide if I want to do a sort of a degree in basic science, maybe biochemistry, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, or medicine. And somehow I decided to go for medicine because I had a feeling that I do want to combine my research with medical questions, and that could be a path where this could be easier, at least from a perspective back then. So how did I get to cystic fibrosis research? So again, I wanted to do a basic research project in my MD thesis, my MD project, but I also wanted something that is closely related to an important medical question. And back then, this was only shortly after the CF gene had been identified. And so I actually studied very basic question of electrophysiology of epithelial cells and how this channel is affected in these cells, how it is regulated or not properly regulated. So it was a pretty basic science at that time, but really with a perspective to one day translate that into a new therapy. And I'm obviously very happy. I mean, these things took more than 20 years, but that it eventually worked.
Fantastic. And so what was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in your particular case? Because it's related somehow, because it's a pulmonary research, and there was a lot of interest as soon as we started to understand what SARS-CoV-2 was doing to the lungs. So there was,
so we were obviously very worried that our patients that have this chronic lung disease would be particularly vulnerable to SARS-CoV-2 infection. And we're actually very careful in the beginning and advised them to self-isolate at home. Luckily, it turned out that they are probably not more vulnerable than the general population. So you may ask, why this is. As I mentioned, they do have a lot of mucus, too much mucus in the lungs, but this may actually protect them, from infection by sort of forming a barrier for the virus to get to the sort of airway and lung surfaces. And they also have this underlying chronic lung, inflammation in the airways, which may, if you think about that, that inflammation is also an important host defense mechanism, which may in part actually protect them. So we, as sort of during the pandemic, and as I'm also a pediatrician and pediatric pulmonologist, observing that children are not as severely affected as adults, we got interested into some COVID research questions. There was a period, and I think this was really a field where during the pandemic we saw that researchers can sort of very well work together to address an emerging question. But at the same time, it had an impact on the clinical studies because it was much more difficult for patients to come to trial sites. And I mean, we are still working on different therapeutic options, and I can tell you that some of the clinical trials, programs suffered enormously, and some trials were even stopped because they could not recruit patients for this period. So I think there are really pluses and minuses, and my hope is that we will be able to catch up with what we were not able to do in the near future.
I hope that too. So I think we have a question from the audience.
So the question goes like this. I read that you're heavily involved in pandemic management at Charité during the corona pandemic. The topic of corona is a very controversial one in society. Have you personally experienced hostility? And if so, how do you deal with the people who doubt the effectiveness of vaccines, for example?
Okay, so thank you for the question. It was a little bit off the topic of my breakthrough topic. So that is a good question. I think it was really amazing how quickly it was possible to develop a vaccine against a respiratory virus in this pandemic, because as you may know, this has not been possible before. We have many other respiratory viruses like RSV, for example, and others where we've been trying to do this for many years. And so in the communication, I think, initially there was a hope that the vaccine could effectively prevent both infection as well as transmission completely. And what we have learned now, and was probably not surprising for a respiratory virus, that targets and that's also something that our research showed, that primarily targets and enters through the airway surfaces, where we have sort of local mucosal immune defenses that are probably not primarily activated by the vaccine that is given systemically. The vaccine, we have learned, does not prevent infection or transmission, but at least in the vulnerable population, it is shown to be very effective in reducing the disease severity. And I think in the discussions, in controversial discussions in the hospital, but also beyond, I think it is important to communicate this openly, and that has been sort of my strategy throughout.
Moving on from the COVID-19 pandemic, in general, what do you think are the main ingredients for good research?
Yes, that's sort of the $26 million question. Yeah, I think the basis is still a good mechanistic understanding. Yeah, so my research interest is in rare diseases. What we have learned from cystic fibrosis is, once you understand the basic molecular defect, and then sort of as a next step, you have to understand the molecular mechanisms. And if you get to that, you can then design targeted therapies. That are designed and developed to really treat and correct the underlying disease mechanisms. And my hope would be that in the future we will able to use this path, this discovery path, what we have developed for cystic fibrosis, now also for other rare genetic diseases. If you think about it, we probably know around 8,000 rare genetic diseases at the moment, most of them with very limited therapeutic options. So together they affect millions of people worldwide. So this would also have a big impact on society as a whole if we succeed in doing this. Part of the problem in the past has been that to really bring a drug to the clinic, to the clinical arena, you need partnership with industry partners. And they, for a long time, have stayed away from rare diseases because they were afraid that the patient population would not be big enough to sort of get a reimbursement of their investment in the research. That's probably also where cystic fibrosis has changed the mindset, at least of some companies, which I think will also be an important component to solve this problem in the future.
So you mentioned rare diseases. So are these rare diseases something that is now emerging because there's more knowledge, or is it simply because they're not fatal enough, so people are not so aware? It's not. It's my question is a question of just small numbers of people that have the disease, or is it the severity of it, or just the lack of common knowledge for people to actually go and see if everything is normal with them?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to it. So many rare diseases are actually caused by genetic defects, and I think there that the evolution of genetics over the last 20 years has really helped or enabled to diagnose, to establish a diagnosis of a, of a severe disease phenotype, if you will. And the other question depends a little bit on the, on the healthcare system and the part of the world. And as you alluded to, in many, countries, Africa, Asia, with unfortunately still a less developed healthcare system, many of these diseases, even if they have been described and defined at the molecular level, are still underdiagnosed. So if we say the global population of patients with rare diseases increases, then it's mostly due to improvement in diagnosis, and then also improvement in management that will further improve the survival of the patients.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have another question from our audience.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Hello, hi. Yeah, thank you so much for organizing this conversation for us. I'm a PhD student and I'm looking into cystic fibrosis as well. And I'm actually doing qualitative research at the University of Manchester in the UK. And I've interviewed 10 families and 10 healthcare professionals about cystic fibrosis and self-management in cystic fibrosis. And I just wanted to say that I was really excited to, read about your research. The CFTR modulator therapies have been mentioned a lot in my research. It's like groundbreaking medicine, changing the lives of people, really positive impact. And it's come up in all of my interviews. So I'm really excited to talk to you right now. I guess I've got two questions really. You've talked about like good research, and I was wondering if, because your research mostly focuses on, developing medicine, developing drugs, is there any qualitative research that you're aware of that, is being done in this area, maybe on, I don't know, improvement of like standards of living, things like that, or in quality of life?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, also for your comment, and that's something I forgot to mention earlier. That now with this sort of pharmacological correction, of the underlying defect, this has really had a striking and unprecedented effect on the health of our patients in terms of improvement of lung function, but also quality of life, so energy, so they can really make new plans for their lives now. And I agree with you that it will be important to also do quantitative measurements, analysis of these improvements, and also, there are always two sides of the coin. What can still be and still needs to be further improved. And a very important aspect, as you also alluded to, is to do that in a real-world setting. Yeah, so not in a highly controlled trial, clinical trial that you initially need to test and obtain approval for new therapy, but also really measure the impact on patients' lives in their home, in their environment. And I think there are several activities that have been initiated in this direction. And here I think it's also important to include the patient's view. Yeah, so not only what is important for the scientists and the clinicians and what they want to know, but what do the patients believe has the biggest impact or is important to their lives.
I'm looking forward to see those studies. So we don't have a lot of time left. We have 2 minutes. So what would you like to see more in the world? Just bear in mind that we have just less than 2 minutes.
Okay, so that's the biggest question. So what I would actually like to see at the moment in a world that seems to be, much more polarized, and torn apart, that I would ever have imagined 10 years ago. I would like to see more, how to put it, more integration again, more sort of, reasonable approaches to solve the big problems we have, thinking about war, energy crisis, pandemics, in a much more reasonable fashion and jointly than it is has been approached in the last 5 years or so.
So, last question. If you weren't a doctor, researcher, what would you be?
So since I can travel again now, I've been on some flights and had some very nice sort of views of the world from the above. Both sunset and in the early morning. And sometimes I think, may also be fun to have more of this. But that's sort of just thinking out of the blue.
You'd be a pilot? Okay, so we have to leave it there. Marcus, congratulations again on your breakthrough prize, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and to everyone online. And thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Philip, for having me and also for the questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.